Get a job, disgusting walking zombie. My son sneered while counting my pension money that I had just withdrawn from the ATM. But he didn't know that he was shortening his time in this house. That night, I slept with my back to the door. The habit I developed after my husband died. I never lost that instinct to protect the front, to brace for the noise, the push, the shame that always came from behind. I woke early, before the house stirred. The sun hadn't yet cracked the edges of the kitchen blinds, but I moved quietly, making coffee, slicing apples, buttering toast. Just the way they liked it. Not because they deserved it, but because I was still someone's mother, still someone's grandmother, and old habits die slower than old women. As I set the plates on the table, I heard the shuffle of my son's slippers, the yawn he never covered, and saw the phone clutched in his hand, as if it were fused to his skin. He slumped into the chair like a king returning to a throne he never built. "About time," he said, glancing at his watch. "Next time, try not to wake the whole damn house with your arthritis parade." He took the coffee and slurped it loudly, without so much as a glance in my direction. I poured mine quietly and sat at the corner of the table, folding my hands in my lap. "You're lucky, you know," he said after a while, chewing with his mouth open. "Most people your age don't have family that puts up with them. They rot in homes, cold beds, strangers changing their diapers. But not you." "Yvonne," he said, made my skin crawl. His wife came in next, still in her robe, scrolling her phone, eyeing me like I was a stain that refused to wash out of the rug. "She overcooked the eggs again," she muttered, pushing her plate away. "Do you not taste your own food before serving it?" "Maybe her taste buds rotted with the rest of her," he said, smirking. They laughed together, the kind of laugh that made the room feel smaller. I stared at the slice of apple on my plate, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for it. I thought about all the times I had peeled fruit for him when he was little, how I used to cut out the seeds in the shape of stars to make him smile. "She's practically furniture at this point," his wife said. "Takes up space, collects dust, doesn't contribute anything meaningful." I stood to take my plate to the sink, but my hand slipped. The porcelain hit the floor hard, shattering into dozens of sharp pieces. It echoed louder than I expected. "Are you stupid?" He jumped to his feet, fists clenched. "Are you serious?" I immediately crouched to pick up the mess. My knees burned, my hips screamed. I bent over like a rag doll being folded back into a box. He marched over and hovered above me. "You need to stop this. You think we're made of money to keep replacing dishes? What's wrong with you?" I kept my eyes down, reaching for the jagged edges. One piece caught the inside of my finger, slicing clean and deep. A thin line of blood trailed down to the floor. I wiped it with the sleeve of my sweater. Then came the sound of paper. Crisp, fresh paper. Bills. I looked up. My son sneered while counting my pension money, holding it up and flicking through the bills like it was some kind of game show. His eyes gleamed with something darker than greed. Control. Triumph. "You think this makes you useful," he said, waving the stack in front of me. "You think we feed you, clothe you, house you out of kindness?" He walked over and crouched next to me, and he saw it. He grinned wider. "Get a job, disgusting walking zombie. But remember, your salary belongs to us." Then, with a casual flick of his hand, he slapped the stack of bills against my cheek. Not hard, but it didn't have to be hard. It was meant to humiliate, and it did. I froze. I could hear his wife laughing behind him. Not loud, just enough, just cruel enough. "You want a tissue?" she asked. "For your old feelings." He stood up and tossed the money onto the table like garbage. "Clean this up," he said, pointing to the broken dish. "And try not to bleed on anything else." I stayed on the floor long after they had walked out. The baby cried from the other room. No one moved. I picked myself up slowly, cradling my hand, the blood mixing with soapy dishwater as I rinsed what was left of the morning away. I felt visible yet dehumanized. A shadow of usefulness. A guilt trip walking on two legs. But in that moment, blood on my sleeve, knees aching, face still stinging from the slap of money, I remembered something. I remembered who I was before I became furniture, before I became the old woman in the corner, who cooked and cleaned in exchange for being allowed to exist. And I remembered what they had forgotten: the house was not theirs. Not entirely, not legally, not morally, and not for much longer. People like to believe old women have always been old. They see the wrinkles, the slow steps, the trembling hands, and assume that's all we ever were. Fragile, forgetful, fading. And I wasn't born a shadow. And I wasn't always quiet. There was a time my legs could carry me through floods. My voice could steady a whole unit of soldiers. My hands held more than trembling spoons and shattered plates. They held lives. In my youth, I served as a medical technician in the military. Most people are surprised when I tell them that. I suppose I don't look like someone who used to carry stretchers through sandstorms or stitch open wounds while the ceiling shook from nearby shellfire. But I did, and I was good at it. I had a head for numbers, a calm mind under pressure, and a gift for sensing when something was about to go wrong. The boys called me radar because I could predict when a patient was about to crash before the monitors did. Later, when I returned to civilian life, I didn't slow down. I worked in the emergency room of our county hospital, did night shifts when the younger nurses wanted holidays off, and spent weekends teaching first aid at the community center. My hands were always moving, my mind always sharp, my back never turned on anyone who needed help. And yet somehow all that got lost. Or rather, buried under the diapers I changed, the dinners I cooked, the silence I accepted. I was not always just mom. I was not always just grandma. And I sure as hell was not born to be called a burden. But the moment they stopped needing me, they started erasing me. They started rewriting my life. That was the worst part. Not the neglect, not the insults, not even the loneliness. It was the rewriting as if my life started only when I became useful to them. But there is someone who never let me forget who I was. Her name is Elise. She was 7 years old when I met her, and she was dying. It was during a historic flood in my hometown. One of those once-in-a-century disasters that drowns memories and families in the same breath. I was visiting my sister when the rivers spilled over and turned streets into torrents. Sirens screamed, trees snapped, people called out names that no longer had answers. I saw her clinging to a thin branch near the edge of a collapsed bridge. Her arms were purple from the cold. Her mouth was just above the waterline. Her eyes, my God, her eyes were wide with terror and locked onto mine the moment I spotted her from the hill. I didn't think. I didn't shout. I ran. The water tore at my legs, cold enough to steal breath, sharp enough to feel like knives, but I kept moving one step at a time, my eyes fixed on that little girl. I reached her just as the branch snapped. She fell into my arms instead of the current. She didn't speak for hours, not even in the ambulance. Just held onto my shirt like it was the only thing tethering her to life. Her parents had died, their car swept off the road, both gone in an instant. She was alone in the world. But that night in the hospital, when the nurse asked her who I was, she whispered, "That's my mom." At first, they thought it was shock, trauma, misplaced trust. But weeks passed and she didn't change her mind. I visited her every day until she was discharged, then every weekend, every birthday, every holiday, every time the school called and said she had no one to pick her up. Eventually, I signed the papers. Officially, she went into the foster system. Unofficially, she was mine. Elise grew up with fire in her chest and a mind that never stopped asking questions. She wanted to know how I stitched wounds without blinking, why I never married again, why I kept my medals in a drawer instead of on the wall. Every time I answered, she listened, not out of duty but because she truly wanted to know. Even now, decades later, she calls me every Sunday without fail. "Hey Mom," she says, "tell me something I don't know about you." And I always do. A story from my past, a patient I remember, a scar I never told anyone about. And she listens like it matters, like I matter. Last week when she called, I told her about a time I had to perform CPR on a 6-year-old while the generator failed and the room was in total darkness. She cried. She said, "You are so much more than they let you be." She meant them. My son, his wife, the people who see me as a walking expense report with a pulse. There is a quiet kind of cruelty that doesn't scream or slap. It whispers. It smiles while it sharpens the knife. It comes in the form of politeness. "We're just helping. Sign here, it's nothing." And the longer you stay silent, the deeper the blade goes. It started with papers. My daughter-in-law slid them across the table one afternoon while I was folding the baby's laundry. The baby who still smiled when she saw me, the only one who did. "It's just a little formality," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Something the bank needs in case of emergencies, you know, so we can help manage things for you." She said the word, manage, the way someone talks about garbage collection. I looked down at the papers, pages of small print, words I hadn't seen since I left the hospital world. Financial power of attorney, full access, revocable but only under mutual agreement. "You'll still have control?" She lied without blinking. I'd like to read it first, I said. Her smile cracked. Of course, but no need to overthink it. It's standard. I took it to my room. I did read it, every word twice. Then I put it in the back of my sewing kit where I knew they wouldn't look. The surveillance began subtly. My grandson, all of 12 years old, suddenly became concerned about Grandma. He started sitting with me more, asking questions. Who I was talking to, what I was writing in my notebook, if I had any weird dreams. I knew the difference between care and surveillance. I had seen it in war zones, and I was seeing it again on my own porch. One day, he brought me my coat before I left for a walk. A simple gesture, sweet even. But when I slipped it on, something in the lining crinkled. I reached into the pocket and felt it. A square bump, smaller than a phone, thinner than a wallet. A tracker. They wanted to know where I went, who I saw, what I did. I was no longer a grandmother. I was a security risk. They changed the passcode on the safe in the hallway. When I asked why, my son said, When I asked, for the new code, he said. Why would you need it? I reminded him. I keep my will and personal papers inside. That's why we changed it, his wife said, not looking up from her plate. To keep you from making emotional decisions you'll regret. They laughed, I did not. Later that night, I found my phone locked after 7:00 p.m. They said it was to help me sleep better. No screens before bed, Mom, my son had said, patting my shoulder like I was a toddler who forgot how to lie down. Except it wasn't about sleep, it was about silence. They didn't want me talking to Elise, didn't want me sharing stories or fears or, God forbid, plans. They wanted me quiet, still, passive, like a maid with memory loss. You're lucky we don't charge you rent, his wife told me one morning when I asked if I could have my phone back early. You're here on charity, remember that, charity? I asked, genuinely confused. She pointed to the refrigerator. Whose name is on the grocery receipts? Whose name is on the internet bill? Mine, I said. Or at least it was. That was then. This is now. I had built this house, painted its walls, paid its first 3 mortgages, fixed its roof when the tree fell in '94. But now I had no room for memory. Now I was a tenant without keys, a ghost with bills, a servant with no title. It started with silence. They didn't speak to me at breakfast, not even a glance. Later that morning, they called me into the living room. It felt like being summoned to court, except there was no judge, only a jury of people who had already made up their minds. My son held up a printed spreadsheet, highlighted in yellow. Want to explain this? I squinted. It was a call log, my call log. Lines and lines of numbers, timestamps, durations, all outgoing, all to one person. Lise, I said quietly. His face twitched. 14 times in 1 month. You think we wouldn't notice? I was just what? His wife snapped, plotting. Confessing. Whispering your little sob stories to someone who's not even your blood. I blinked. She slammed her laptop shut and stood up. Do you think we're stupid? Do you think we don't know what this is about? She threw the paper onto the floor. The house, you senile old bat. You think we don't know you're planning to leave this place to that stray you picked up from the flood like a wet dog. Elise is not family. She screamed, stepping closer. She's trash. She's nothing. And you are a delusional old woman clinging to fairy tales because your real family has stopped pretending to care. My son moved closer, folding the spreadsheet like he was pocketing a confession. You really think you get to choose? You think you have a say in what happens when you're gone? I stared at him. Do you think a piece of paper will change anything? When you die, we're the ones who will clean your body, sell your things, burn your pictures, and pretend you weren't an embarrassment. That hit harder than the money slap ever did. He leaned in close enough that I could feel his breath on my cheek. Do you think you have the right to choose? When you die, you're just a corpse that needs to be cleared away. I had heard worse from enemies in war, from strangers in emergency rooms, but never from my own blood. Still, I stood my ground. Elise is the only one who asks if I've eaten. The only one who remembers my birthday. The only one who listens when I speak. My daughter-in-law laughed, a cruel, throaty laugh that made the room colder. You want to reward her for doing what? Picking up the phone. You'd throw away your whole family for a phone call. You are not my family, I said. Not anymore. That was the last straw. My son lunged for my phone, snatching it from my sweater pocket before I could react. His grip crushed my wrist bone for just a second too long. You don't get to talk to her anymore, he growled. You don't get to talk to anyone. That night, they turned off the internet. They locked the doors from the outside, and I knew in the deepest part of my gut I had been officially erased. My son never could hold his liquor. That night, I heard him stumble into the kitchen around 11 p.m. The floorboards creaked under his weight. Bottles clinked. A drawer slammed. Then I heard the call. I couldn't make out the first words, but I recognized the cadence of his voice when he thought he was invincible. Loud, mocking, smirking through syllables. What I didn't know was that he had called Elise intentionally, drunkenly, to brag and destroy. The next day, I found out exactly what he said. He had called her from the landline, laughing into the receiver like a villain in a play. "You think she loves you? You think you matter to her? I'm her real family, not you." I wipe her drool. I watch her shuffle around like a half-dead scarecrow. And guess what? I'm going to bleed her dry like a vampire until she croaks. That's what she's for. That's what old people are for. Then came the line that changed everything. "And you're nothing, by the way." Trash she picked up during a pity parade. "She doesn't love you." No one does. Just like her. No one has ever really loved her. That's why she clings to leeches like you. Elise recorded every word. She sat in her studio apartment, listening to a man she had never met speak of the woman who saved her as if she were a carcass to harvest. She said nothing. She let him speak. Let him bury himself. When he finally hung up, laughing at his own cruelty, she sat in the dark for 10 full minutes, staring at the waveform on her phone. Then she pressed save, and then she called her lawyer. The next morning, while I was folding laundry I would never wear, the doorbell rang. My daughter-in-law answered it, her voice turning tight when she saw who it was. "Elise, what are you doing here?" I couldn't see her, but I could hear the calm. "I'm here to speak to my mother." "She's resting." "No, she's surviving." They argued quietly, sharply. Then Elise said something that made the whole house freeze. "I have a recording from your husband from last night." Footsteps, a slam, then silence. Moments later, Elise walked into my room. She looked the same, taller than I remembered, stronger somehow. Her hair was pulled back, her coat still wet from the rain, but her eyes were burning. I stood up slowly. She opened her arms. I stepped into them like I had done all those years ago when she was small and terrified of thunder. "He called you?" she whispered. "He told me everything." "I know," I said. "I heard him laughing through the vents. I recorded it." "I know." She pulled back, holding my shoulders. "You are coming with me." They don't have a choice anymore. That evening, in Elise's apartment, I sat her down and opened the box I had kept hidden for 20 years. Inside was no jewelry, no heirloom, no photo album. Just truth wrapped in silence. "There's something you need to know," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. "About the night we met." I told her everything. The rain, the crash. My son behind the wheel, drunk, reckless, fleeing the scene. How my husband took the blame to save our boy's future. How I had spent 20 years caring for the child my son had tried to kill, never knowing if I was loving her or just easing my guilt. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You saved me twice," she finally said. "Once from the water, and once from never knowing the truth. I should have told you sooner. You told me when I needed to hear it most." Elise contacted her attorney that afternoon. She filed reports for elder financial abuse, emotional coercion, and illegal surveillance. She submitted the audio files, attached transcripts, provided dates and incidents, and signed character references from every community service I had ever touched in my long, quiet life. She did it all without raising her voice, because truth doesn't need to shout to win. The story broke 3 days later. Mother's burden. The hidden hit, and run that haunted a hero. It wasn't just about the crash. It was about me. About a woman who saved a child while hiding the monster who almost killed her. I sat under bright lights and said, I thought I was saving my son's future, but I was only delaying his reckoning and betraying someone who loved me with the truth I had buried. 1 week after I left that house, my lawyer arrived at 2:00 p.m. sharp. They were all there. My son, his wife, their boy, summoned by letter. Prepare the execution of Dorothy Harper's last will and testament. Your presence is required. The lawyer laid the folder on the kitchen table and opened it ceremoniously, as if peeling back the skin of a long, dead lie. This will was signed and notarized 5 years ago, he began. It supersedes all previous versions. My son shifted. I thought she updated it last year. No, the lawyer replied calmly. You assumed she did. My daughter-in-law scoffed. She said she would leave the house to the family. The lawyer looked at her. She did. Then he turned the page. To the only person who has called me mom without expecting anything in return. They froze. I leave the house at 431 Willow Lane, the savings account ending in 78014. The certificate of deposit in the amount of 200,000 and the remaining balance of my retirement portfolio, estimated total 1.2 million, to Elise M. Harper, the child I chose with my heart, not my blood. The silence that followed could not be rescued. My son stood up. That's a joke. That's not legal. It is. She manipulated her. No. Your mother initiated this will long before Elise ever became a journalist. She recorded her intentions in video, written statement, and private sessions with a notary. Would you like to see the footage? My daughter-in-law turned pale. She left us nothing. She left you something. He flipped to the final page. To those who believed my love was transactional, my presence was burdensome, and my body was an expense, I leave only this lesson: inheritance is not an obligation. It is a reflection. That afternoon, Elise came to me with a single rose. The baby picked it from the garden, she said. I held the rose. It smelled like summer. It smelled like freedom. I looked at Elise and smiled. You are my family. I always was, she replied. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was no longer a ghost haunting a house. I was someone. I was home.